Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk Winter Webinar Series. If you have any questions during the presentation this morning, please type them into the questions section of the GoToWebinar menu, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. This webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Lori. I'd like to welcome everybody to our winter series or editions of Crop Talk. And one of the things we wanted to do with these Crop Talks is we wanted to, make up for some of the lost presentations that we were preparing for Ag Days. We did have a series of Crop Talks that were going to happen, and I thought it'd be a good idea, being that a lot of the presenters had prepared and were ready for Ag Days. I thought it'd be a good idea to get some of the information into your hands and get things going. And hopefully by spring we're opened up and we'll be back to normal doing stuff. But until then, I thought this was a good idea to get some of the information into your hands. I think one of the important products that is developed and produced through Manitoba Agriculture is the cost of production. And every year we do a cost of production update. And today we're going to have Darren Bond. He's Farm Enterprise Management Specialist, and he is one of the guys that goes through and helps develop the cost of production on a yearly basis. And I thought it'd be a good idea for him to go through some of the stuff that they did for this year's cost of production, how they get some of their figures, go through some of the information as to how you can use this to help manage your farm. I think with the rising prices and inputs, and with hopefully a mirroring image with the rising prices in production, we can use this tool to help budget as we go through the year. So I guess with that, I'll pass it over to Darren, and we'll start with this edition of Crop Talk.
Thanks, Lionel. Appreciate it. I'm going to ask the standard Crop Talk greeting. Can you see my screen and can you hear me?
You bet, Darren.
Thanks. Awesome. So as Lionel mentioned, my name is Darren Bond. I work closely with my colleague Roy Arnott. He's in charge of the complaints division. So anything I say here you don't like, he's the one to talk to. And we go through and do the cost of production guides, much like Lionel was saying. And boy, has there been some wild changes and movements this year. And it's something that, as we'll see in the presentation, things have changed dramatically. Often we'll see cost movement and price movement be very minimal and muted. And this year we've had some wild swings, and it's actually led us to put out a revised document just recently showing the changes in both crop pricing and input pricing, primarily fertilizer and pesticide. So we're going to go through that today and have some discussion on that, and hopefully provoke some thought and have some fun with it as well. Cost of production is very important. It's the foundation for the decision making on the farm. It's so important to know where the costs are. We've traditionally done it in a cost per acre basis. I'm encouraging more and more producers to go on a cost per bushel basis as well. The true benefit of this is the ability to determine pricing points for your marketing strategy. So knowing what your break-even cost is on a dollar per bushel basis and where your profit opportunities are, it just makes marketing that much easier, and you're just that much more confident in marketing. It's also very functional, especially this year is so big that the expenses are going to be that much bigger with these current crop prices that we see and the new crop prices. Being able to time your sales for when your trade credits due, when property taxes are due, loan payments are due, it's going to be very, very important this year to be able to do that effectively, because there's just going to be such wild swings. And my concern is, and I'll touch on this later as well, is that things have moved so much this year that we may be caught a little unprepared as to how big the demands on our cash flow is going to be. And lastly, it's the strategic planning. It's about seeing where the profitability is, where the risk is, what choices we can make between our cropping plans, seeing the strengths and weaknesses in these crops. And these strengths and weaknesses will move. They move, and they moved a lot over this past few months here. So it's very important to consider all of these when we do our cost of production. The cost of production guide is both in a printed guide as a PDF and Excel, and it is on our website. If you Google or search Manitoba Agriculture Cost of Production here, and we have a number of them for not only crops, but also for livestock and forage as well. Well, yeah, this is a picture of the fertilizer tender truck showing up. Fertilizer's just gone crazy. I don't need to tell anybody that. Everybody knows that. I've talked to producers that have priced urea from anywhere from $6.75 right around harvest time right up to $1,300-ish, ballpark what we've seen lately. These prices are just crazy, talking about comparing to the previous year of a tripling. So we've seen, you know, some pretty big moves in that area. And another big thing is we want to make sure that our operating funds are in place. Just a quick trivia note, there is about $2.25 million in this pile here. That's assuming that there's not $5 in there booked with hundreds bookmarked, much like how I would carry my cash around to impress people, and assuming it's not hollowed out. And if you did your costs of production, and at today's fertilizer prices, you would know how many acres of canola that $2.25 million would do, and it is 10,750 acres of canola at our revised COP fertilizer cost of $209 an acre for fertilizer costs on canola. We have a neat little tool called CropPlan that can come up with this information pretty quickly and succinctly, and I think it's very important to be doing that this year, because again, these costs are going to creep up on us and could surprise us. And the nice thing about this tool is that it's preloaded with all of our cost of production data, and so it allows you to start off with our numbers, but of course your numbers are always the best. It allows you to replace our numbers with your numbers to come up with a really good document for cost of production and be able to see where the costs are going to be on the farm, what the aggregate totals are, and then you can look at starting to time these so you know when your outflows are going to happen and time it with some grain sale inflows. So it's very important to understand that, just again, because there's just so many moving parts going on this year. Talked to quite a few producers this year, especially with everything moving around so much. It does get to be hard to make decisions. There's almost two schools of thoughts that are going on. One is choosing crops and varieties that suit the current environmental conditions. I'm coming to you from South Interlake, where the drought was really tough on us. We only got a few inches of rain for the cereals and canola, and the soybeans were able to pick up a little bit of later summer rain, but we were really dry and yields were severely impacted. So producers are weighing that, weighing about whether if we're going to be still fighting drought in the upcoming year, looking at some nutrient scavenging. There's some fields where there's some residual nitrogen, which is good. I'm using air quotations. It's only there because the crop was so bad, but at least with these high fertilizer prices, if we can tap into that, that might help offset the fertilizer costs a little bit. But there's some thoughts about choosing crops for those types of situations. On the other side, there's the school of thought of thinking about choosing varieties that have that best financial risk reward balance. So ones that appear to be quite profitable, have good agri insurance coverage, so it lowers the risk, and looking at it from that lens. And we're going to walk through today and talk a little bit about some of the options that we have and come back to this question. Here's a quick look at our average yields for the past 10 years. And again, surprise to no one, those yields tapered off, and actually we exit this decade of yields on this slide much as we entered it in terms of the average yields. And some of the yields, obviously, like I say, were much lower. It was the rain jackpot lottery draw this year for those who got the rain, and even in areas that were droughted, rain going through, you'd see on one side of the road where it was just a little bit better than the other side just because it got a rain shower going through it. So we're just so dependent on that, and obviously yields were impacted in many parts of the province. Here's a look at our last year's COP numbers and this year's 2022 COP numbers. The big one obviously is fertilizer. It's a huge increase. The numbers under the 2022 column, I do believe we're using around $1,300 a ton for urea and around $1,300 a ton for phos, and just over $2,000 a ton for anhydrous gas, just for some reference. Obviously, some big moves on that end. The seed costs haven't surprisingly gone up that much. For some cereals, some other crops has gone up some, but for other crops it's been flat to just small increases. Pesticides is another area that we've seen some increases. Glyphosate is going to be a big question mark where it ends up. There's been some pretty big increases in that. Fuel, as we've seen, has gone up, and it doesn't take much to realize just looking at driving by the pumps and looking at the pumps, the cost there. And then the last one to draw note to is the Acre insurance cost. And while we're seeing some record Acre insurance coverages, there are some increases in costs too. But considering the coverage that we can get, they're pretty affordable increases, especially when we compare it back to fertilizer and pesticide. Here's a look at our current numbers that we're using. So you'll see these numbers that we're using in our documents, and this is new crop pricing. Now, even new crop pricing is moving around a lot since we produced this document. If we point out soybeans, soybeans are $16, $17 a bushel new crop. So obviously numbers like that are going to change what some of the numbers we spit out in terms of analysis. That's why it's important to do your own numbers, and again, you can start with ours, update it to yours, and get a really good document going. But what we see under the break-even end is we see some pretty high break-even costs and still some quite considerable break-even yields, especially when we look at it through the lens of last year's drought-affected yields. The other thing to bring out, though, is that there's some good potential for profit this year, though. The argument could be made, if we see those types of yields in this slide here, will those prices hold? I guess that's the million-dollar question. I would say that the supply pipeline looks to be pretty emptied, so I think there's going to be some good support for us for the prices and profitability, but it's still something that we have to be aware of and have to consider when we're making our plans. So what we're seeing so far is that while there's some potential for profitability here, it's going to take a lot more money to grow this crop and bring us into this point of looking at potential profitability. Here's our look of our last several years of crop production costs from 2014 to current, and again, it's no surprise to see what's happened this year. We've seen in previous years a slow and steady increase of costs of production, but this year we've just seen a huge jump, and it's an outlier, and it's something that again we need to plan for. And I think that this slide here shows how much of an increase we're seeing in the orders of magnitude larger this cost of putting this crop in. Quick slide here on urea and phosphate prices. We conduct a price survey twice a year in spring and fall, and the fall prices would be for the next year's crop. And we've seen increases here quite a bit. Obviously, we don't have this year's spring pricing in yet, obviously, but I think what we'll see is we'll see that continual increase, and the question is how much will it be? Well, it's looking that there's going to be quite a big increase just from previous years, and we've seen in over, I'd say, the last 10 years, 9 out of 10 years, the spring price was higher than the preceding fall's price, and it's been about around $50 a ton ish on average. Spring price was around $50, $60 a ton more than the preceding fall. What that spread will be this year, it's a good question. But what we're seeing again is that the current cost structures are kind of going out of whack with all the changes that we're seeing. This is from Alberta Agriculture on farm equipment prices, from combine at the top to four-wheel drive tractor in the gray bar. The blue one's an air drill, and the bottom line is front-wheel drive tractor. Again, surprised to no one that we still see this steady and appreciation of costs. And we're one of the things that our department does is we come up with cost of production on farm machinery, and we call it the custom rental rate guide. And that's a great guide and a calculator to figure out costing for equipment. And we've seen that too. We've just recently updated that, and we've seen some increases on those, and even getting away from the equipment purchase side, even repair side, we're seeing that steady appreciation and inflation of costs. Land is always a big consideration when we look at our cost of production guide. It's something that when you own your land is a bit of a hidden and quiet cost until you go and purchase that land or rent that land. That's when the value comes and hits you. And we've seen over the last few years around a 3.5%, 4% appreciation year over year. My question is going to be, what are we going to see in the next few years here, next couple of years? Are we going to see a return to 2012, 2013 type appreciation numbers? I guess a large part of that's going to be answered with, are we going to suffer through another drought, or are we going to see production return back to normal ranges? And with that, the crop pricing and everything that goes with it, what are we going to see in land values? And it's a bit of a wild card right now, but generally that span of time from 2012 to 2015, there's some profitable years, and it gets reflected back into land values. Another question we're seeing, now again, we're talking about all the different things that are appreciating on the farm in terms of costs, from the inputs, and let's talk about interest rates a little bit. We've seen historic lows for interest rates, but there is chatter that we're going to see some interest rate increases. Chatter is from anywhere from 4 to 6 quarter-point increases. If we see that, that'd push us back up to around that 1.5%, 1.75%. That's not a real big deal when we're looking at fertilizer increases and pesticide increases and the cost of fuel and the cost of all these things. It's not such a big deal, but I think we have to take a step back and realize how insidious interest rate increases can be in terms of our bottom line. And a 2% increase doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it actually is an increase of 44% in this example. So it's like there's that 5% rule that I'm sure many of you have heard of, that if you can make 5% improvements or cut 5% here and there, it has 100% or even 1,000% impact to things. Well, interest rate kind of works the same way, where it sounds like it's not a big deal, but it can be a big deal. And it's a very big deal on farms that are a little bit lower in equity. An 85% equity farm, which Stats Canada tells us is roughly the average equity in a lot of farms across Western Canada, would see a $14 an acre increase. So let's call that a bushel an acre of canola. Where in a 65% equity farm, you're going to see 26 bucks an acre increase, and that's, you know, approaching $2 a bushel. And that's the challenge, obviously, in farming, is that all these bushels go to pay off all these other things before they get to come back to the farmer. The farmer is the last one to get paid. So this is just another hand in the pocket if we see these interest rate increases. So it's definitely something we want to be aware of. Here's a quick slide of our average crop prices. So these are weekly closes. These do not capture the interweek highs, lows, or even the intraday highs and lows. But I think taking a step back and just seeing what we've seen in some of these pricing, where we've had this period of time where the previous crop year of 2019 to 2020 was very stable. And it doesn't look like there's much movement there, but I heard doing these slides a couple of years ago, there was movement in those areas, but to look at what we have now, like, that's nothing. It's so much more dramatic right now. But we come out of this period of stability in pricing, and stability in cost of production, cost as well, to what we see right now. And thinking back to that average yield slide, and thinking and looking at this slide, the myth of yield invincibility has been busted and broken on a lot of farms, where a lot of farmers in their careers haven't seen the wild fluctuations in yield, and have had fairly stable yields and have had fairly stable pricing. Well, all that's been thrown out the window now. We've had that, wild fluctuations on yield, wild fluctuations on pricing, and now wild fluctuations on cost of inputs in terms of costing. So this has really caused us to really need to be able to step up our game and be able to manage this effectively, because while there's an ability to make some money this year, there's also the real possibility to lose money this year as well. And that's where we get into the risk section of our presentation. So there's a lot going on in this graph. I'm going to walk you through it though. This is a profit graph on canola. So we're saying we're taking a 44 bushel average at 18 bucks a bushel. A lot of producers would love that right now. I'd take that too. But that's, again, the 44 bushels an acre. That's the probable yield. The confirmation of insurance for 3 insurance are out, and we use that yield data to come up with an average, and there's still some pretty decent probable yields out there. So if we look at this black line that's right on the screen, we can see at the top left hand, if we're seeing 44 bushels an acre, which is 100% of our probable yield, we can see a profit of $167 per acre. And I think especially after last year's drought and the yield effect on last year's drought, as we start sliding down that line, so as we start getting less yield, obviously profitability deteriorates as well. But at the Acre Insurance 80% level, it essentially comes in and stops the bleeding, stops the loss. And in this case, that's at 35 bushels an acre. And as you can see here, what this chart is telling us is that if we were to suffer a yield loss, if we get down to 80% or 80% coverage, that is our safety net. And the bleeding stops there, and we can actually see that we can make a small profit, $8 an acre at that. So I'm essentially going to say we're going to break even. So with the use of today's coverages at 80%, we can essentially stop our losses, and we can break even on this crop through the use of Acre Insurance in this case. That's a hugely beneficial spot to be in, and that's going to be something that we see with canola actually is a bit of a bright light for some of the cropping decisions that we have to make. The ability to use Acre insurance to guarantee that you're not going to lose money with in this example. And we can see that if we don't have 80% coverage, we start to lose. And if you don't have any insurance, you just on that slide and it just slides all the way to the bottom. And at the bottom, we see 13 bushels an acre, and canola yields in our area would have been around that, and some would have been considerably worse. It just didn't even get anything for rain. So those yields can happen, unfortunately, and we found that out this year. And I think that this graph here is a good picture representation of how Acre insurance can maintain a break even in this example. So let's look at some other crops now just to show how they compare, so we can kind of compare that risk profile between crops. We move to hard red spring wheat, and again, using those numbers, we can see that if we suffer that yield loss and we get down to our 80% coverage, and that's when crop insurance comes in, we still would have lost $76 an acre in this example. So comparing this back to the canola example, even if our crop insurance comes into the rescue, we're still going to have a loss on this. And a big part of that is because the profitability isn't as great as compared to canola. This again is where it's important to put in your own numbers. Some of the wheat yields out there have been truly impressive. What we'll see again for upcoming season is to be determined, but we can throw in different scenarios here to see how that moves around. We can put in our own probable yields from our crop or our Acre insurance data to see where we find out with this, and we can calculate that if we are going to see a loss at the 80%, how much is that loss going to be? And that helps with contingency planning and saying, okay, well, if we have another bad year, this is the type of loss we're looking at. One of the biggest differences, obviously, from the upcoming season to last year is that this upcoming season, we have a very expensive crop input package with this, where last year, relatively, comparatively speaking, we didn't. So the numbers would have been a lot different from last year to this year. So we could have seen 20% yield loss. So again, 80% coverage kicks in, and maybe those losses on a per acre basis wouldn't have been as great. But when we're looking at this fertilizer pricing and this pesticide pricing and this fuel pricing and just everything that's going along with that, these losses are now magnified. So we need to really be able to look at this and be able to see, okay, well, hopefully we don't have the type of yields that we had last year, but if we do, what does that look like? And again, once we hit that 80%, it doesn't really matter how much less yield there is. Of course, there's a price spread difference between what Acre insurance price is and the market price, but if we just put that aside for now, we just look at this, we can start to bracket again what our losses are going to be. And then looking at soybeans, it's actually picked up a lot. And if we were to use 16 or 1650 for what the current new crop price would be, it'd be even a little bit healthier. Before Christmas, the soybean prices were pretty soft. We've seen a pretty impressive rally over the last 2 months. If we were to use pricing before Christmas, these numbers would have been more in the red. And that's why it's important to continually look at this, because it is changing, and especially after the past year with reluctance with forward contracting, with being short on contracts. The challenge is that we are estimating a new crop price, but we have locked in either very little or none at all because of our experiences last year. So these things move as we have that uncertainty in our pricing situations. I want to bring up oats as one example. This graph is actually showing that we can see our 20% yield loss, and then crop insurance or Acre insurance comes in, and we can actually insure for a little bit of profit at the 80% level using these examples. So it's pretty interesting to be able to compare cost of production on your own farm to your acre insurance coverage levels to be able to see where you stand and what that loss is. And knowing this actually creates some good discussion on the farm for, again, what crops are we going to grow, and we are rotationally bound, of course, for a lot of crops, but we do have swing acres to be able to decide, okay, we're going to move to this or move to that, or try new things, or try different combinations. So it's something that oats has shown to be very positive. Again, it's comparatively speaking not a big fertilizer user, say, compared to wheat or canola, but there's definitely some probable yield out there, and the prices are pretty decent right now as well. So I always talk when we talk about things, and we need to discuss the risk reward of our decisions. If we all are emotionally attached to agriculture, we're all very passionate, we all love what we're doing, but what we do need to do is separate that emotion and take a step back and have some cold analysis over our cropping decisions on the farm. And I'd equate it to, if it was someone in manufacturing, they're going to be looking at things of, okay, well, it's going to cost me this much to do this, I'm going to risk this much, what's the potential profit in this, and is that amount of risk I'm taking worth that profit? And that's what this exercise in these next few slides essentially does, is it starts to identify what's at risk for what you can gain. In this slide here, the blue shaded area is the amount of acre insurance coverage as divided by our target yield. So essentially, this is on a dollars per bushel basis. So essentially, in this example, we're showing that for the first $13.05, that's essentially what we have covered through acre insurance. So that's our safe zone. If we move into the next, moving up in the red shaded area, that $1.16, this essentially is the difference between our break-even price minus our acre insurance covered costs. So if you remember back several slides, our break-even on canola was $14.21 a bushel. So the difference between $14.21 a bushel and $13.05 is $1.16. That's essentially the risk. So that's what we're risking. So if we were to suffer a loss, that's what the loss would be on this, the difference between our break-even cost and what our acre insurance coverage is if we were to divide it again over our target bushels and to come up with that value. Lastly, the green area, that is the profit zone. That's the difference between our expected market price and our break-even price. So if we're assuming an $18 per bushel new crop market price, subtract our break-even price, $14.21, so it's $3.79 a bushel is what we can see. Got in the bottom corner, obviously we want to maximize profit, minimizing risk, of course. And then when we look at the 6 main crops, we can start to see some pretty interesting stories being told here. I'm going to contrast canola and soybeans firstly. We're looking at, on the canola and the soybeans, looking in that red zone, the risk zone. Essentially, soybeans have twice as much risk on a dollars per bushel basis, but half as much yield potential or profit potential in the green zone there. So that's kind of interesting in telling me that, you know, using these numbers for canola, using these numbers for soybeans, we can start to see a tale of two different stories here. Let's look at the cereals. Let's look at hard red spring wheat, oats, and barley. On red spring wheat, we're risking $1.40 a bushel to get 78 cents a bushel of profit. Where we look at oats, and actually thinking back to those slides where we can actually insure a small profit, there's no risk. Essentially, it's in a negative. There's no risk. There's only reward in this, and it's $1.74 bushel. And we look at barley, which is the ugliest of the three, where we're essentially risking $1.89 a bushel to gain a profit or a reward of 11 cents a bushel. So again, risking a lot to gain a little versus oats, where we're risking, like, I wouldn't say nothing, but the amount of risk is very limited because of our crop insurance coverage, and there's some good profit there. Where we go back to wheat, and we are risking some for a small reward. So of course, everyone's numbers in this area will be different, but it's fairly straightforward to look at. It's taking your crop or your acre insurance coverage, dividing it by your probable yield, having that as a number, doing your cost of production, coming up with a break-even price, having that number, and then looking at what the projected new crop market price is going to be, and comparing those three, and coming up with your own risk and reward matrix. I think it will be quite telling, and it'll be interesting just to see on your farm how it compares to these, but also the different crops on your farm to see where the values are, where those soft spots for profit may be, the potential for opportunity, but then also where the risky crops are, and crops that you have to be aware of. And if we start to see a slide in environmental conditions and yield deterioration, when you're going to keep your wallet in your pocket sooner versus some of the other crops that still have some profit potential. Knowing this at this time of year gives you such a huge benefit for planning, not only in crop selection, but then how you're going to manage those crops throughout the season. Get a quick slide here on seeding date. We've seen the yield potential by seeding date, and Roy and myself have looked at that and said that's nice, but it's all about the money. Where's the profit in this? And so essentially, using our cost of production data from 2022, using the projected new crop pricing, we've come up with a very similar slide that looks at profitability. That line in the middle of the $0 line is the point of zero profit. Below the line, obviously, is a loss. Above it is still profitability. And what we see is that wheat, you want to get your wheat in early. I'm not surprising anyone by saying that. But canola can hold on to some profitability a little bit later. So it's interesting looking at this and using real numbers and using what we've seen through the Acre Insurance Network for yields with seeding dates to be able to look at this, and it tells us that we want to be getting that wheat in early, and the canola can hold on to its profitability a touch longer. So we can, if we're in a compressed seeding timeline, if we're looking at later on in the calendar, we might be looking at this for determining what we're going to plant next. Speaking of which, I think it's important to frame our decisions with what type of situations we're looking at. This slide is the Canadian Drought Monitor. This is from October 31st. So this was the end of the season, so before the snow. And we can see some pretty scary situation here in terms of dryness. And again, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone, but when we fast forward to the end of January, so this is considering the snow that we have, we can see that things have improved in Manitoba. We can see out west that there's still some significant concern, but there's still some drought areas in Manitoba that we need to be concerned about. And the snow is good, and it's going to help. It'll help with everything from water table. It'll help for the beginning of the season. But I also think that we need to take a step back here and realize that we're going to also need some timely rains here throughout the growing season. And it's something that I don't know if those outside of agriculture understand that. They may see all the snow and think that we're good for the year, but we have a long ways to go here. And a lot can happen here, and we're really still going to be dependent on those timely rains. This slide here is a slide, this is from the end of the growing season, so October 31st. This is our department slide on soil moisture situation, and the yellow's optimal, and as we go down to red, it's moves to dry. And we can see that there's still a decent chunk of the province that shows as optimal. However, especially considering the dryness that we had, the heat dome, we can move from optimal to dry in a pretty short timeline. So we're still on that knife's edge, even in those areas, for suffering some negative yield impacts. So we're, again, going back, we're still going to be dependent on those timely seasonal rains as we get into the growing season. So there's still a lot up in the air, and that's the risk part that I really want to get across, is that a lot can still happen here. And that's why we need to do these costs of production, so we can keep our fingers on the pulse of our farm and make sure that we're making good decisions with good information and knowing what potential outcomes are. Do some what ifs, and having these numbers in front of you does make it relatively quick, and it will bring a lot of comfort and confidence in decision making. So we go back to those decisions. Are we going to choose crops and varieties that suit the current environmental conditions? In our area, wheat and beans were the winners. We was able to root a bit deeper and tap into some of that moisture, a little bit better water efficiency. Beans had was able to use the late season rains that we've seemed to be getting over the last few years. We look at choosing crops for the best financial risk reward. Well, from what we've seen today, canola and oats are winners in that category. But we look at the canola and oats yields in my area, and they were definitely the losers in the yield category. Some truly terrible yields in canola and oats. However, with the Acre insurance package that they have, there is some pretty good safety nets there too. So maybe versus answering questions, just raise some more, but that's at least then when we can identify this and we understand the risk reward package of each of these crops, we can make a decision that fits our risk profile, that fits our comfort level in what we do. Closing out the presentation, just a few of our tools and resources that are going to be timely for this time of year and in the near future here. We have our rent plan document. It's an ability for producers to figure out what they can afford to pay for rent. Again, using cost of production data and coming up with margins, and allows producers to estimate what they could see for rent based on land value. So it's we've been getting a lot of rent calls, Roy and myself, over the past few weeks here. So I just want to make sure that people are aware that that's out there. To support that, we do have on our YouTube channel a land rent playlist, some short videos there that again are very helpful and helps both producers and landlords walk through the process and some considerations and characteristics for good land rental agreements. Just search up Manitoba Agriculture YouTube land rent and you'll get straight there. Our fertilizer calculator, we have this in Excel. Again, a quick and easy way to look at different fertilizing rates, different fertilizing costs. Many people have this, just to let people know that Manitoba Agriculture has one as well. We have a seeding rate and seed cost calculator. We've had demand or requests from many people to say, well, what can we look at, maybe skimping on seed rate and cutting back and doing various things. This is a good calculator to be able to estimate different scenarios between seed germ and survivability and different seeding rates to see what it does for the cost per acre. And one of the things I've found is that you can go and skimp a little bit, but you can save a few bucks here and there. But when we look at the big fertilizer bill and the big pesticide bill and the big land bill and the equipment payments, that there may be better ways to save money than to skimp too much on seed. That actually this year, especially with the amount of risk that we have, the amount of costs to grow this, I don't think we want to shave too much or we don't want to cut any corners, because while there's some good profitability we have, there's also some potential for loss if we don't manage things properly. And lastly, we have a crop receiving tool. This is looking at the situation where flea beetles, frost, whatever the case may be, where there's looking at a reseeding situation, it's a pretty easy calculator to figure out what you can get for different scenarios, what yield potentials are for seeding later in the year, and looking at different scenarios like that. And it takes the emotion out of decision making and shows what the numbers are for your situation. And the exciting part about those tools is that come end of March, we're planning rollout for these calculators to be in web form, so HTML5, so you can use them on your phone, on your tablet. You still use them on your computer, but they're then will be mobile, so we can use these real time out in the field. So we're pretty excited about that, and you'll be hearing from us through Twitter and website updates for when those become live. We have, I think, about 20 of them, just over 20 of them that will be coming out at the end of March. So I think it's pretty exciting, and it'll allow us to use these things on our phone so we can get the, again, real-time decision making out in the field, which is going to be so crucial this year with just the amount of risk, but also the amount of profit that can be had too. So that wraps it up for me. Lionel, I don't know if there's any questions or comments. Fire away.
Okay, thanks, Darren. That's got first off a couple comments saying great presentation and lots of good information. One question, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, I guess, but all this information, the question was, is it located where, and can it be downloaded and saved onto my personal computer?
Yeah, so our cost of production guide, so we have a cost of production guide, and then that crop plan, the 10,750 canola acres from our stack of cash that we're fertilizing. Those are in Excel format, so you can download them. They're free, save them. We do have information that is preloaded on there, and you can go through and save your own information and gradually build a situation that reflects your own farm. And we do have a lot of the analytics portions in there as well that will show the risk and reward and the break evens and those types of things. So those are all built in there. They are in Excel, they're free, and you can save those copies and use them as you wish.
Okay, the MASC values that you were using for crop prices, are they on the spreadsheets, or were those the accurate prices?
So there's two prices in the documents that I was using. We have like I'll throw back to that canola where we're at 44 bushels at $18. That $18 is an estimated new crop price. It's not the Acre insurance price for that commodity for the upcoming year. That is different. Whenever we do these projections, we're using an estimated new crop pricing to reasonably estimate what the situation is. And again, we don't want to be using old crop pricing. You know, we're in the mid 22s, like 2250-ish or whatever it is. We want to be using new crop pricing for our decision making, but the coverage levels through Acre Insurance are using the Acre Insurance prices. So that $18, that's just an estimated target price. That's something, again, based on new crop pricing that we've been seeing. And I think actually right now it's closer to $18.50. But again, that's where those numbers are coming from.
Okay, how do you determine your land cost values, whether it be rent or to purchase?
Yes, good question. We see this a lot, and this is a very important question. There's a few ways to do it. From a producer's perspective, probably the easiest way is to come up with what your land payments are, and over your owned acre base, coming up with those land payments, dividing it on the acres that you own, comes up with a land cost. That's a good first step, and that's something that everybody should know. And again, it starts to ground us and root us in decision making that we can go from going forward. Others will take the market price of the land and times it by rate of return, say of 2%, and then add the property taxes on top of that to estimate a land cost. There's nothing wrong with doing that too. That cost though, so let's just take, say, a producer whose land is bought and paid for, who doesn't really have land costs. This is more estimating what I would call an opportunity cost. So if you were to sell your land and throw it into an investment, what could you be making from it? That type of a scenario. For land rent, the challenge with land rent, I have whole presentations on land rent. So this is a pretty meaty topic. Land rent is a dark market. It doesn't have transactions like what we'd see with land sales, or even you can go into equipment websites and find what equipment sold for. Land rent is a dark market, so it's a little bit harder to estimate. So we've come up with two methods. Again, that's in that rent plan. One method is determining what's left over from a producer's perspective that they're able to pay once they've paid all the inputs, paid their fixed costs, not land, but equipment, those costs, labor. Once they've taken out a profit margin for themselves, what do they have left over to pay? That's again what we've termed our producer's perspective. And then the landlord perspective is looking at what the value of that land is and using that, say 1.75, 2%, 2.25% return plus property taxes as a way to come back. So those are so two numbers that that someone can use to reasonably estimate land rent. But land rents are all over the place. Like I said, it's a whole new discussion. We see land rents. I've talked to producers and landlords where land rents are anywhere from $25 an acre to almost $200 an acre. So it all depends on where you are and the productivity and then how hot that market is.
Okay, some real good information there, Darren, and I think Lori's going to add some of the links to a lot of your pages and your when she sends out the recorded edition of the webinar. So then everybody will kind of have an easy access to get at it. You guys do a great job putting this together, and I think a lot of producers and industry people use it. So again, thanks for the presentation and a good job.
Thanks, anytime, Lionel. Appreciate it and appreciate the discussion.
Great. Okay, well, I've got a few slides to finish off today's webinar, and we'll whip through those. I wanted to put up a slide with the farm management contacts in the province. So if you're going through a lot of this information and got questions, I'm sure that any one of them would be willing to work with you as to get through some of the things, especially if you have questions regarding the use of them. So definitely contact these farm management people. I wanted to put out there that the Agri Recovery Drought Assistance Program is still on and going. The deadline is not till April, so if you're in a position where you're buying feed for your livestock, there is the program where you can get some assistance. There also is assistance if you're moving cattle around, so that's available as well. And there's new updates happening to the program all the time. So if you've got questions, definitely give some people a call. There's the 1-800 number, and a lot of times if you call that number, you'll get maybe even Lori answering your call, and she's well versed on the program, and so is the other people that are answering those phones, so they could definitely give you information as to what you need to do to get your applications. And again, then there's just the address to our website. The hay listing is still up and running, so if you're looking for feed, I haven't looked at it for a while, so I'm not sure if there's a whole bunch of feed still available through there, but it is one option for you if you're looking for feed. Your ag adaptation specialists, these are the guys that people that I work with. Where a lot of us are working on the program, so if you've got questions regarding it, don't be scared to give these people a call, and they can either help you or direct you in the way so you can get the information you need to complete your applications. Livestock specialists as well. There is the livestock specialist in the province, and Again, if you've got questions regarding programs, winter feeding programs, ration balancing, all that kind of stuff, we're doing a lot of different things with feed this year, so definitely give these people a call and they can help you through planning the rest of the winter. Your crop insurance offices, again, another place to get a lot of the information that you may need to do your cost of production that Darren talked about today, as well as information regarding the drought assistance program. So don't be scared to give these offices a call as well. They will have applications there if you aren't able to do it online. Preferably do them online because they get in faster and they get processed faster that way. But if mail is required, you can get applications through them. We're going to be having more crop talks. The next one is going to be in 2 weeks, and we'll be involving a lot of these people again. So stay tuned for the, I guess, the next edition and the next topic as we go through the rest of winter here and try to get as much information for you out as we can. And that will be in 2 weeks. So March the 2nd will be our next crop talk, and please join us then. And once again, thanks for attending, and we'll talk to you again.